Welcome back. All right, so going in reverse order from the bottom of the league, I did the New Jersey video earlier. Now I'm talking about the Chicago Blackhawks. So we're going from, where Montreal and Arizona were to now we're into the bad teams that had a bad record. But Chicago wasn't supposed to be this bad. They picked up Seth Jones in the offseason. They also picked up Marc-Andre Fleury. They felt like that would fix their blue line, that would get their goaltending in order, and everything looked good. And they didn't give up anything to get Fleury. The player that was traded in exchange for Fleury immediately was terminated of his contract by the Vegas Golden Knights. So this was just simply a money move. And then, of course, at the deadline, when things weren't going the way they wanted it to, Chicago made pretty good on the return for Fleury, considering they didn't give up anything to get him. So for Chicago, their record this year was 28, 42, and 12. 16 wins in regulation. Not enough. And the season just absolutely crashed out of the gate. This was a team that, once we reached early November, it was done. This is the thing, right? Where a good start to the season can get you in the playoffs. A bad start to the season can mean you're out. And so the 1-9-2 start, which got Colliton fired, that's when we knew it was basically done. Now, there's always the possibility a team goes on a huge winning streak under a new coach. They did get better under Derek King initially. By the end of the season, the record was back to win a couple, lose a couple kind of thing. But for Chicago, there are some question marks going forward. King could come back as a coach next year. At least that's the most recent word on it. They're still deciding what they're going to do with this team and what things are going to look like next year and what the plan is going forward. But for Chicago, this was, I would think, one of the worst years in the history of the organization. I can't talk about the season on the ice without talking about the season off the ice too, right? Because October 26th, your key date, is when Stan Bowman resigns. This is when the NHL gives them the $1 million fine as well. And Kyle Davidson takes over as the interim general manager. He would win that job as the permanent replacement for Bowman. So here's where it gets dicey when you're looking at the off-ice versus the on-ice, right? The off-ice stuff that Bowman resigned over, yep, get that. Totally, absolutely get he had to step down. Hawks fans have been calling for Stan Bowman to be fired for years. So it aligned so that the on-ice product was likely helped via his resignation. At least that's the idea going into next season, right? Although at this point they're signaling that they're ready to do some sort of a rebuild, which they didn't do under Stan Bowman because there was a belief that the core players of the Hawks weren't really all that interested. The veterans weren't all that interested because by the time the team would get good again, their careers are winding down. So they want a chance to win another one, right? Now, their overall numbers would tell you they just flat out weren't good enough. Their goal scoring, 219 goals for, that is 28th in the NHL. Goals against, 291, that's 26th in the NHL. So simple math tells you that's a problem. Their power play, 21st in the league at 19.2%. Their penalty kill was 24th in the league at 76.2%. So their overall special teams, below average. Their scoring, for and against, also not good enough, right? As I said, Colliton was 1-9-2. They fired him. They brought in King. He was 27, 33, and 10 as the replacement. And I think Derek King was decent enough that if they decide to bring him back next year, I would totally understand that. I would get it. So for Chicago, October, 0-7-2. So by the end of October, the season was essentially done. November, they were 7-5. So that's where you get that bounce. That's where the new coach comes in. There's that improvement of the record. And fans will say, hey, we've got a chance here. We just need to be a few games above 500 each month, and eventually we're in that hunt. They were 4-3-2 in the month of December, 5-7-3 in January, 3-5-1 in February, and then after the deadline, it continues to go downhill. 5-7-2 in March, 4-8-2 in the month of April. So just not enough wins, and that 1-9-2 start really does it for them, right? That really is where things sink for them. So for Chicago, their top producers is an interesting list because you've got Patrick Kane at the top. Now, he's not under the pending UFAs because it's not until next summer he's a UFA. 78 games, 26 goals, 66 assists, 92 points. And whether you love Patrick Kane or you hate Patrick Kane, in the event that Patrick Kane looks at his numbers, looks at his age, and looks at the state of the team and says, you know, I could be a free agent next summer. Might want to go somewhere else. Or I might at least want to check out the market. And if he decides I'm not going to re-sign right away with Chicago, I want to see what the market offers. Things could get really interesting for the Capitals for the Hawks from there. Just watch the Capitals win, so Capitals on the break. But yeah, Kane, if he decided to test the market, almost every GM you would think would at least check and see what the asking price is. DeBrincat, 82 games, 41 goals, 37 assists, 78 points. He would be very upset if Patrick Kane decided to make that kind of a move. I think Kane stays in Chicago. So before anybody says, oh, he's saying Kane's going to leave. No, I think Kane stays in Chicago. We'll see for how long and for how much money. DeBrincat's goal scoring, absolutely. I'm not going to say it's dependent on Kane because it's not. He's a good goal scorer. But it definitely helps playing with Patrick Kane. Maybe it gets him an extra 5 or 6 goals above what he would have got. But I will also say that having DeBrincat to pass to keeps Kane's point totals up as well. Seth Jones, 78 games, 5 goals, 46 assists, 51 points. His contract, which is kicking in, is going to be a huge bone of contention, I would think, throughout. There are some who believe that Seth Jones, the offensive game is good, that his overall game is pretty good. And then there are others who will tell you game by game by game where Seth Jones has problems, where there's holes in his defensive ability. And the 51 points in 78 games is good. But if you look at all the scoring being done by defensemen this year, honestly, you would have expected Jones to be up around the 60-point mark too, because defensive scoring is up in general. So his numbers, and then people don't like plus minus, but his I think was a minus 37. Not great. And so, again, Seth Jones's contract is going to continue to be an issue, right? So whether you loved the move at the time of picking him up from Columbus and giving him that contract, or you hated it, it's going to continue to be a bone of contention and a point of discussion. Dylan Strome, who was a healthy scratch at one point, 69 games, 22 goals, 26 assists, 48 points. And I remember early in the season reporting that Chicago didn't have plans for him. They didn't see him as being part of their franchise, and they were looking to move him, so they were sitting him out. He ends up with a 22-goal season. Would have had at least 50 points if they hadn't made him a healthy scratch. So Strome's position on the team should be pretty secure right now, right? I don't think they're going to look to move him. The biggest question mark might be Jonathan Toews. He missed it all of last season. This year he played 71 games, 12 goals, 25 assists, 37 points. The offense is not what it was. Defensively, he's not the stalwart that he was either a few years ago. That's to be, expected. It's how aging works as well. So Toews with that contract, in the event, and I'm just saying in the event that Jonathan Toews says at some point this coming season, I think it's best for me if I'm traded at the deadline. If something like that happens, his contract's going to be tough to get moved. Even with the salary cap going up by $1 million, might be hard to find a team that has the kind of cap space. Chicago would have to do a lot of retention. And again, with his production being down, you would think his production would have to come up a bit next year. It might limit the offers coming in, unless the team picked him up and then signed him to an extension as soon as they've got him. Maybe work out a sign and trade, right? Your pending UFAs, interesting with Chicago. You've got DeHaan and Gustafsson on the blue line. Not earth-shattering if they lose either player. They're both players that can be replaced. But in net, you've got Delia, who had a couple of good games down the stretch. And then you've got Lankinen, who I think was okay. I think if they choose to bring him back, I would understand. If they choose to revamp their goaltending this summer, I would kind of understand that as well. The Chicago Blackhawks, I think they have some room here to improve things if they choose to. Because while they've said they're doing the rebuild, they could absolutely solidify their goaltending in this offseason. And to me, the biggest question mark with Chicago comes back to Toews and on some level to Kane as well. We saw Duncan Keith end up being moved to Edmonton. That was thought unthinkable. A, that anybody would take the full contract was thought unthinkable. And B, that you'd break up that core. But they did. And so I do expect them to make some moves this summer as well with the future in mind. This is a team that could use a boost. And one guy who could really use a boost and is not on the board is Kirby Dach, who looked like he was going to be a very good power forward. And this season, it just wasn't there. And I'm not sure where the blame would go with Doc and with his play falling off. But he's not the same player he was a couple of years ago. He needs to get back to being that player. And so I do think that however they decide to approach this, whether they look at it and say it's a conditioning thing, or they look at it and they say, well, we need to get our development better, or whatever they decide, they need to make that decision relatively quickly, I would think, in terms of players who are already on the roster. You can take your time in picking other spots in your organization. But yeah, Chicago's going to be very, very interesting to watch in the offseason. There's a lot of work to be done. And there are some interesting contracts here. There's a lot of money being spent on very few guys here. So we'll see which ones are still in the Chicago organization a year from now and how many of them are elsewhere. Because if there's anything we've learned over the last, I'll say 5 or 6 years in hockey, it can be very unpredictable as to which players stick around with the franchise and which ones don't. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.